Welcome back to the Church History Podcast and our Christmas season. Welcome to the Church History Podcast. I'm your host, Lorelee Siemens, and if you're new to this podcast, we cover the story of the church in chronological order. We started in episode 1 with the life of Christ, and we are now all the way into the late 1800s and early 1900s. But for this month, the month of December, we're pausing our normal episodes and we're covering the story of Christmas. And since this episode covers church history chronologically, we're covering the story of Christmas chronologically. But before we start, just a reminder that both of my books, my first book, The Church is Born, and my second book, The Church is Corrupted, are on sale in December. And here's a little commercial for you. I previously published the book, The Church is Born, which was part 1 in our series, and that delved into the creation of the church. But my second book picks up where the first one left off. It offers a unique and insightful perspective on the church's journey. Discover the rich history of the church, its triumphs, its failures, and its heroes. In this second book in the series on church history, we journey through the pivotal moments that shaped Christianity as we know it. From the foundational theology of the early church to the inspiring lives of great men and women who boldly stood for their faith. Explore the church's role during the Crusades, the Inquisitions, and even the discovery of America. Learn how over centuries the church began to slowly lose its way, setting the stage for the monumental changes just before the Protestant Reformation. With each chapter highlighting a different story, you're going to be inspired by the heroes of our faith and challenged to reflect on the lessons from the church's successes and its stumbles. Whether you're a seasoned historian or just beginning your exploration of church history, this book offers valuable insights for everyone. Both books, The Church is Born and The Church is Compromised, are available on Amazon for you to order. So if you haven't gotten the first book, why not get both today and delve into the comprehensive understanding of the church's journey? The Americanization of Christmas, 1783. In 1783, the War of Independence ended, and America was officially born. Determined to distance themselves from all of the British traditions, Americans rejected holidays that were associated with the monarchy. On the first Christmas after independence, the U.S. Congress held a session on December 25th. This was to emphasize their separation from Great Britain. For the next 67 years, the United States had no national holidays. However, by the early 1800s, Christmas celebrations began to emerge, although not formally. These festivals were rowdy, carnival-like, especially in cities like New York. At the time, New York had a sharp divide between the wealthiest Americans and the poorest, and the carnival atmosphere led to chaos in the streets. In response to this growing disorder, writers and thinkers began reshaping the image of Christmas. And that is when Washington Irving wrote Bracebridge Hall, and that painted this idyllic picture of Christmas celebrations in a fictional manner, where the wealthy shared all of their abundance with the poor. The story emphasized family, love, and, most importantly, peaceful gatherings. There was no rowdiness. That was characterization of what Christmas was like at this time with all of the street carnivals. It was around this same time that a pastor named Clement was inspired by the story of Santa Claus, which we now know, of course, as Santa Claus. He decided to write this whimsical poem about this Dutch saint. He wrote it for his children, and the poem was A Visit from St. Nicholas. Today we know it as Twas the Night Before Christmas. And this poem introduced elements like Santa's sleigh. For the first time, the reindeer had names, and there was this cheerful depiction of Christmas Eve. And although Clement never intended for this poem to become famous, and in fact, he felt really embarrassed by its popularity, it became a foundational piece of the American version of Christmas. Despite these evolving ideas of Christmas, the carnival-like celebration persisted, and sometimes it even became violent. Now, in Britain, the peasants would demand food and drink from the lords, but in America, without any lords, there was no one to demand food or drink from. So the poor began attacking the wealthy. And that began leading to increasing calls to reform and refine Christmas as a time of generosity and family harmony. In 1804, the Holy Roman Empire officially fell. While historians often mark the fall of Rome during Augustine's lifetime and refer to the Eastern Roman Empire as Byzantine, the people of this era still called themselves Romans. And this makes it all the more interesting that centuries later, the church crowned Otto I as the first Holy Roman Emperor. Unsurprisingly, the Byzantines, who considered themselves the true Roman Empire, weren't fans of this so-called New Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire's territory spanned most of Central Europe, including modern-day Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Austria, the Czech Republic, parts of France and Italy, and even Western Poland. While vast in size, the empire became increasingly fragmented over time. By the 16th century, the Reformation began reshaping Europe. We've talked a lot about the Reformation in our past episodes, and I'll put a link to a few of those in the episode. But for today, it's enough to know that the Reformation weakened the Catholic Church's grip on power. People began reading the Bible for themselves. New Protestant churches began flourishing, and education expanded through establishing schools. The church attempted to suppress these changes through imprisonments and even executions, but Protestantism only grew stronger. In the century between the Holy Roman Empire's fall, its state began governing themselves more independently, despite normally being under the empire's rule. The period saw a growing sense of nationalism as regions embraced their own language, their own cultures, and their own traditions. Then a brutal war between Austria and Prussia deepened these divisions. When Napoleon emerged in the early 19th century, the Holy Roman Empire was no longer Catholic and barely Roman, and scarcely an empire. Napoleon, coming from France, decisively defeated the weakened empire, leading to its official end in 1806. And this brought an end to over a millennium of rule, overnight. Following the empire's end, Napoleon formed a new French-controlled confederation. German-speaking people, frustrated by the presence of French soldiers on their land, responded by fiercely promoting their language and their culture. They refused to speak French. They organized German festivals, German plays, and German concerts. The arts became a really vital tool for preserving German identity, despite French's influence. This was one of the first moments when people began calling themselves German. At this time, being German wasn't tied to a nation because Germany wasn't even a country, but it was tied to speaking the German language, embracing German art, and most importantly, opposing French culture. Napoleon's eventual defeat in 1815 marked another turning point. France was punished at the Congress of Vienna, and Europe's leader created laws to establish a balance of power. This became the foundation of what we have today, modern Europe. Austria gained significant territory, and both Austria and Prussia emerged as the major powers. One of the key outcomes of the Congress was the foundation of the German Confederation, and this included the regions where our Christmas story began, and it laid the groundwork for the unification of all German-speaking people. One of the most famous Christmas carol was composed in 1818, just 14 years after the empire's collapse, and 2 years after the Congress of Vienna. Europe was in flux, borders were being redrawn, wars loomed, and national identities were forming amidst all this chaos. Yet even in uncertain times, life in small villages carried on. In a small alpine village, a young assistant pastor named Joseph attended a local play. This was growing in popularity. Theater was more than just entertainment. It was a means of preserving the German language and culture during this time of national uncertainty. Now, this particular play told the story of Jesus Christ's birth, and Joseph, like the rest of the audience, was captivated by its simple beauty. When the play ended, Joseph lingered for a while with his friends before heading out into the cold night. The air was crisp, and as he tightened his coat against the chill, he walked along a familiar path. Eventually, he reached a spot where he could look down at a nearby village. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and he imagined families gathering by warm fires, their children tucked into bed, and as snowflakes fell softly, floating through the air like feathers, Joseph just stood there, still, taking it all in. Despite all the world's chaos, the wars, the shifting borders, the growing tension, this peaceful winter scene reminded him of something greater. He thought of another quiet night long ago when Jesus was born. It was a moment he wanted to remember forever. And in that stillness, Joseph recalled a poem he had written a few Christmases earlier. It was a message of simplicity and peace, and it seemed perfect for his congregation. They needed hope, and they needed to be reminded of the beauty of Christmas amidst all of this uncertain times. Inspired, Joseph decided the poem should be set to music for the upcoming Christmas Eve service. Joseph sought out the church's musician, Franz, and the two met the next day in St. Nicholas's church. However, when they arrived, they were greeted by a daunting sight. The river near the town had flooded. The church was waterlogged. Worse still, the organ had been damaged and it was unplayable. "It seems there will be no Christmas Eve service," Franz lamented. "No," Joseph replied, "there must be a service. We'll clean this up and we'll find a way. You have a guitar. We don't need an organ." Determined to proceed, Joseph and Franz set out to work. Franz composed a melody to complement Joseph's poem, adapting it for the humble guitar. Together, they prepared for the Christmas Eve service. At St. Nicholas's church, the congregation gathered as snow fell softly outside. Franz strummed his guitar, and the two men performed the song for the first time. Its simple melody and heartfelt lyrics filled the modest church, touching the hearts of everyone present. This song, Silent Night, was born. A few weeks after Christmas, the organ maker came to the church and fixed the organ. Before he left, he asked them to play the song that they had written. Joseph and Franz knew they had created something special with Silent Night, but they didn't know just how special. The journey was just beginning. Not long after the church's organ had been repaired, Franz sat down and played Silent Night just to make sure everything was working. The organ maker was listening intently, and he was captivated. "That is the most beautiful song I've ever heard," he said. Franz smiled. "Would you like a copy?" The organ maker eagerly agreed, and Franz wrote down the melody and lyrics for him. When the organ maker returned to his village, he shared the song with his church. Two well-known singing families were part of that congregation. They often performed for German cultural events. The song moved both of the families so much that they added it to their series and began singing it the following Christmas season. Now, around that time, the German Confederation had been formed, and this united German-speaking states under shared trade and currency agreements. However, Austria was actually excluded, and that created a lot of tensions in the region, including that small alpine village where Silent Night was born. In 1834, the King of Prussia invited one of those singing families from the organ maker's church to perform Christmas songs for him. Among their selections was Silent Night. When they sang it, the king was deeply moved. "That is the most beautiful song I've ever heard," he declared, and he issued a Christmas decree. "From this day forward, I decree that this song must be sung every Christmas Eve." And so it became a tradition for churches across all the German states to end their Christmas Eve services with the song Silent Night. Despite its growing fame, only a few people knew that Franz was the composer. By his death in 1839, most people assumed a great classical composer had written the song. Franz was a busy father of 12 children, and he never sought recognition for this song. One year, an Austrian family named the Reiners traveled to New York City. They were a singing family, and they performed at a church called Trinity Church. And they ended their concert, of course, with Silent Night. The audience was enchanted, and there was a priest at Trinity named John Young, and he translated the song into English and published it in a Christmas songbook. The choirs began performing it regularly, and the song quickly gained popularity across America. Back in Europe, the region remained embroiled in conflict. Throughout the 19th century, there were uprisings, reformations, and wars, continually reshaping the borders. Austria's role in unifying German states was hotly debated. There was so much tension between Protestants and Catholics, and that only deepened. Between the year 1864 and 1870, they redrew borders multiple times, creating so much uncertainty for the villagers who really wanted nothing more than peace. That small alpine village near St. Nicholas's Church suffered greatly. By 1900, the river flooded again, destroying the church and forcing most of the residents to relocate. In fact, a century after Joseph first saw that village on a snowy night, it was gone. By the early 20th century, even more upheaval had started. From 1906 to 1912, Kaiser Wilhelm II expanded Germany's military, and he escalated European tensions. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered a conflict that engulfed the entire world, World War I. It was heralded as the war to end all wars, a final attempt to resolve centuries of shifting borders. Amid all of this chaos, the song Silent Night endured. It continued to be a message of peace and simplicity, and it resonated deeply during all of this unimaginable suffering. It offered a reminder of hope and unity. In 1914, on a cold Christmas Eve, a young soldier began to sing his favorite Christmas carol. Across the battlefield, a German soldier joined in. This would become known as the Silent Night Truce. For one brief moment, amidst the chaos of World War I, soldiers from opposing sides put down their weapons. They exchanged gifts, they played soccer, and shared a rare moment of humanity. Silent Night served as a reminder that even in the darkest times, peace could still exist, even if only for a moment. The Silent Night has carried this message of peace through generations, especially during so many times of uncertainty. In our world today, as we navigate cultural changes, political unrest, and even personal challenges, it's easy to feel like the foundation of our lives is unstable. Yet there's something about Christmas Eve, something about singing Silent Night, that quiets our hearts and reminds us of peace greater than anything the world can offer. I believe God gave this song to a congregation during great unrest. The people who sang it in 1818 lived through a century of turmoil. Wars, shifting borders, riots, reformation. A child who sang it that first night would grow old seeing their village destroyed by floods and their nation in chaos. They actually never knew peace in their lifetime, but they could know peace in their hearts. That's the promise of Christmas. Even if there's no peace in the world, our country, or even our homes, there can still be peace in our hearts. Silent Night reminds us of the peace only Jesus can bring, a peace that endures through wars, storms, and uncertainty. Why? Because on one holy night, a virgin gave birth, and God himself entered the world. Jesus, who would live his own life without earthly peace, came to earth to bring eternal peace to all who believe. So, if we sing Silent Night this Christmas, let it be a message of calm and hope, and let that message settle over your soul. It reminds us that no matter how chaotic the world feels, peace is possible through Jesus, the Prince of Peace.
Jesus,